I knew the company party would be the perfect time to reveal the truth. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only way to make everyone understand the depth of what had happened. The room was bright, full of smiles and clinking glasses. It was the typical end-of-year celebration, where everyone pretended that things were fine, where they forgot their everyday problems for a few hours. I braced myself for that moment, and as I looked at each face, I knew that soon they would all turn to me. I grabbed the microphone, took a deep breath and started. "Good evening, everyone," I said, in a controlled, almost casual tone. "I want to thank you for another year of hard work and dedication. But before we continue the party, I need to make a personal announcement." An uncomfortable silence took over the room. I could see the curiosity, the surprise, and, on some faces, a restrained nervousness. "I'm divorcing my wife." Those words were like a bomb, which exploded and reverberated throughout the room. Some laughed nervously, thinking it was a bad joke, but they quickly realized there was no humor on my face. "And I'll tell you why, she's having an affair with her boss." The impact was immediate. The sound of conversation ceased, and all that was left was a muffled murmur of disbelief. Expressions varied between shock, curiosity, and almost palpable embarrassment. I could see the surprise in her eyes from across the room, where she was trying to blend in with the crowd, as if she could escape that confession. I saw his lips move quickly, forming a denial. "That's not true," she shouted, trying to make herself heard. But his voice sounded weak, desperate, and only reinforced what everyone already suspected. At this point, the look she avoided said it all. That initial shock turned into silent judgment. And so I continued, without looking away. "Oh, are you going to deny it? Are you going to say it's all my invention?" A bitter, tired smile escaped my lips. "Do you think I would do something like that, that I would expose myself like that, if I wasn't sure? Because, believe me, I have proof." I didn't need to say anything else. The simple fact that I brought up the subject was enough for everyone there to know that there was an undeniable truth in that revelation. There was something in the air, an electric tension, as if everyone was waiting for her next move, the bosses, me. But she remained there, frozen, looking around, trying to find an ally, someone who could support her denial, but no one dared to say anything. The boss, who until that moment had been away, pretending to be distracted by some conversation, also froze. His hands shook slightly as he tried to maintain his composure. "This is ridiculous, let's continue the party, this is not a topic for this moment," he said, his voice louder than normal, trying to regain control of the situation. But people were already whispering, some were already checking their phones, and I knew the news would spread like wildfire. The impact wasn't just on me, it was on the reputation of everyone involved. It was a wound laid bare for all to see, and there was no turning back. What it was? "Are you going to deny it too?" I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. Everyone was paying attention, their eyes fixed on me, waiting for more. And I knew they were absorbing every word, every nuance. Because, believe me, this isn't just my problem. It's a problem that will affect all of you here in one way or another. I could see the expressions changing, as if a heavy cloud had fallen over the once vibrant hall. The party suddenly turned into something dark, almost suffocating, and everyone knew they were witnessing something that would change the atmosphere of the company forever. They exchanged looks, some in disbelief, others trying to calculate the consequences of that revelation. But what intrigued me most was the look of panic on his face, the boss. He knew that, from that moment on, everything was out of control, that the mask he wore as an impeccable and respectable leader had been ripped away. She tried to get closer to me, her face was red, a mixture of anger and fear. "That's not true. He's making it up, he's delusional. You can't believe this, he's trying," but his words trailed off as he realized that no one was paying attention. I didn't need to respond. She knew, and I knew, that this was the moment all the lies she had told fell apart. "I'm getting out of here," he said, trying to force his way through the crowd. But it was too late. There was no escape. The truth is, I never planned to do it this way. The pain of being betrayed, of knowing that the person I trusted had stabbed me in the back, was unbearable. But even worse was knowing that the man she cheated on me with was someone I saw every day, who was in charge of everything. I could accept many things, but this was too much for me. And if I were to fall, I would take them all with me. Because there are certain betrayals that, when revealed, leave scars that everyone can see, that burn far beyond the four walls of a room. And I wanted everyone to feel that pain. May everyone see the truth behind the facades. When I said those words, when I made the announcement, I knew it would be the beginning of the end. Not just my marriage, but everything they had built around their lies. Because secrets like that don't die alone. They explode, they spread, and the impact is always devastating. And I knew that from then on, nothing would be the same. I wanted to destroy what had destroyed me, and I didn't care about the consequences. But what I didn't expect was what came next. Because in that room full of accusing glances and whispers, there was more than just betrayal and sordid secrets. There were more people involved than I could have imagined, and the consequences of what I did that night would go far beyond a broken marriage and an exposed boss. I was about to discover that when you start digging, you can find a lot more than you bargained for. And some truths are so dangerous that they can drag everyone around to the bottom. Welcome to the channel, where the stories you will hear are fictional, but the lesson is real: betrayal destroys lives. Here, we never support any type of betrayal. Our goal is to show how these acts can devastate relationships, families, and trust between people. So, get ready to dive into a shocking story, full of twists and turns and intense emotions. Now, relax and let yourself go, because what comes next will keep you hooked until the last second. Good story. Lucas walked down the office hallway with the confident posture that everyone knew. He was the kind of person who radiated a calm but steady presence, as if he always knew what he was doing, even when the world around him seemed to be falling apart. For his colleagues, he was an example of professionalism and determination, someone who had built his career with a lot of effort and who always demonstrated respect and loyalty to everyone. In recent months, however, there was something different in his gaze. Small moments of distraction, long looks out the window, and a silence that contrasted with his usual sociable behavior. Anyone who really paid attention would realize that he was dealing with something that deeply bothered him, but Lucas had always been good at hiding his emotions. From the outside, Emily, his wife, was a woman who looked like she was made to shine. Her long black hair fell in perfectly calculated waves, and her easy smile somehow seemed capable of dispelling any tension. She knew how to be the center of attention, whether at parties, friend gatherings, or work events, and perhaps that's why she was so loved in the company. Everyone admired her friendliness, and Lucas's colleagues often commented on how lucky he was to be married to her. Emily had that charming way of making everyone feel important, of being thoughtful and kind. But behind that impeccable smile, there was a complexity that few knew about. They had been married for 12 years. It was a union that began like many others, full of shared promises and dreams. Lucas was ambitious and was determined to grow in the company where he worked. He had met Emily during a business event. She was vibrant, full of life, and the opposite of his calmer, more reserved personality. This attracted him immediately. Emily seemed to bring a perfect balance to her life. She was the person who turned any simple outing into a memorable event, who filled awkward silences with funny stories, and Lucas fell madly in love with that. He remembered how the first few weeks of dating were like a whirlwind of emotions, an escape from the monotonous everyday life. Over the years, they have built a life that many would consider enviable. They lived in a spacious apartment, decorated elegantly but without ostentation. The walls were adorned with paintings that Emily had carefully selected from local galleries and art fairs, one of her passions. Lucas always enjoyed watching how Emily chose each piece with such care, as if each painting had a story to tell. He felt that this attention to detail was one of the things that brought them together. She brought color to his world, and he offered her stability and security. But things change, even when no one wants to admit it. Over the past few weeks, Lucas had felt a growing distance between them. It was not something that could be easily identified, there were no violent fights, nor prolonged arguments. But there was a silence that weighed more than any word spoken. The soft touch that once warmed his nights was now replaced by a coldness that Lucas couldn't understand. He began to notice that Emily went out more, came home late, always with an excuse ready. Something about unexpected meetings, or work dinners that went on for too long. Lucas knew that she had an intense social schedule, after all, her work as a public relations officer required it, but there was a new frequency in these commitments that worried him. On the other hand, Emily seemed to be living a moment of full flowering. She was always smiling, always with something new, a new project or an event to plan. There was an energy in her gaze that Lucas hadn't seen in a long time, but ironically, it only seemed to drive them further apart. He saw her happiness and, instead of feeling relief, he felt out of place, as if he no longer belonged in that part of her life. Attempts to talk about what was happening resulted in evasive responses. "You're imagining things," she said, laughing. "It's just work, I'm a little busier, that's all." And for a while, Lucas wanted to believe it was true. He wanted to believe that this growing discomfort was just the result of his own insecurity. The company where Lucas worked was one of the main reasons why he was so proud of his career. He had started as an assistant, working his way up little by little, earning the respect and trust of his superiors. Their boss, Jonathan, was a charismatic man, known for leading with a combination of authority and charm. He was someone everyone wanted to impress, and it was no different for Lucas. Jonathan was a man of vision, someone who knew how to turn a company into a powerful brand. He had the trust of his employees and the admiration of many, including Emily, who often mentioned what a brilliant leader he seemed to be. Lucas had his moments of doubt. It wasn't many times that he allowed himself to question someone's intentions, but there was something unpredictable about Jonathan, something that Lucas couldn't completely decipher. Maybe it was the smile that always seemed more calculated than sincere, or the way he could manipulate a room full of people into agreeing with him, even when his ideas were clearly controversial. Jonathan was a leader, but he was also a player, and Lucas knew it. I just didn't imagine how far that game could go. Life followed a seemingly normal course, with Lucas and Emily keeping up appearances. They were seen together at events, sharing laughs and relaxed conversations, as if nothing was out of place. But when they arrived home, that facade crumbled into a silence that seemed to spread to every corner of the apartment. There was an invisible tension, something no one else could see, but it was there, constant and overwhelming. Lucas felt trapped in a dilemma: should he confront Emily, demand answers, or simply continue pretending that everything was fine? In the days leading up to the company party, Lucas began to notice that the dynamics in the office had changed. Jonathan was more distant, reserved, and avoided looking directly at him. The cordial smiles they usually exchanged had turned into short, formal waves. It was as if a layer of ice had formed between them, and Lucas didn't know if it was just his paranoia or something deeper. Emily, in turn, seemed more excited than ever for the party, planning details, choosing the perfect dress, as if this event was the opportunity to finally escape the tension that dominated her home. And then, the night of the party arrived. The lights shone brightly, reflecting off the guests' champagne glasses and sparkling dresses. Everything looked perfectly organized, with the kind of elegance Emily liked to create. Lucas watched as she walked around the room, greeting everyone, laughing, as if she were the perfect hostess. He noticed Jonathan from afar, surrounded by some colleagues, his face marked by a smile that seemed forced. Lucas tried to push away the feeling of discomfort, but it was there, stuck like a shadow. He knew something was going to happen that night, he just didn't know what. The party continued like any other company event. Toasts, speeches, and that air of celebration that made everything a little lighter, more bearable. But for Lucas, every smile, every look exchanged in the room, seemed loaded with a meaning that he still couldn't understand. He had decided that tonight would be decisive. And as he held a glass of champagne and looked around, he knew that no matter what happened from then on, there would be no turning back. The night progressed, and the party went on as planned, with the glitz and glamour of a successful event. Lucas watched everything with an attentive eye, absorbing every detail, every movement Emily made around the room. She looked stunning, her smile easily flowing as she chatted with colleagues and friends. It was almost impossible to believe that behind that glow, there was a growing distance that he felt every day, like a chasm slowly opening between them. For weeks he tried to understand what was wrong, what had changed. And that night, he knew he needed the answers, even if they came in a painful way. He moved a little away from the center of the party, finding a quiet corner where he could observe better. Jonathan was there too, surrounded by a small crowd of colleagues who laughed at his jokes and anecdotes. But there was something about his behavior that seemed strange, as if his confident stance had been replaced by a kind of silent warning. Lucas noticed how he avoided locking eyes with him, looking away whenever their eyes met. This only reinforced what he already suspected. Over the past few days, he had seen Jonathan leaving the company at unusual times, and once, late at night, his eyes caught the familiar silhouette of Emily next to him, getting into a car that he knew was not hers. During the party, Lucas tried to distract himself, mingle with his colleagues, smile and participate in conversations. But her mind was fixed, an invisible thread that connected Emily's every gesture and word to Jonathan's presence. He remembered what it was like to be by her side at first, how much she seemed to compliment him. Emily always knew what to say, always knew how to light up a room, and he was proud to be by her side. But now, watching her from afar, he wondered if he really knew her, or if that woman who smiled and enchanted everyone was just a facade. He decided to get closer, slowly blending into the group where she was. Emily didn't notice his presence right away, too busy having a lively conversation with a coworker. When she finally saw him, there was a brief hesitation in her smile, a small sign of surprise that Lucas didn't let go unnoticed. "Are you well?" she asked, trying to sound natural. Lucas nodded, smiling. "Of course. I just wanted to see how much fun you're having." Jonathan appeared at her side shortly after, his cheerful tone contrasting with the sharp look he shot at Lucas. "So, Lucas, how are you enjoying the party? Emily did an amazing job helping plan everything, didn't she?" Lucas nodded again, observing the interaction between the two, the quick exchange of glances, as if something invisible was transmitted between them. For a moment, Jonathan seemed relaxed, but there was an underlying tension, as if he was prepared to react at any moment. Lucas walked away from the group, his thoughts racing. He needed concrete proof, something that would confirm his suspicions once and for all. For weeks he had tortured himself with doubt, with that gnawing feeling that something was happening beneath his nostrils. But that night, he was determined to see it through to the end. "I couldn't take the uncertainty any longer, and if there was ever a time to confront everything, this was it." The party was still in full swing when Lucas decided to leave the room and take a walk. He needed to clear his mind, but he also knew that if he wanted answers, he needed to look outside that controlled environment. He walked down the hall, past dark meeting rooms and closed offices, until he heard voices coming from a room at the end of the hall. He recognized Emily's voice, although she was quiet, as if she were trying to have a private conversation. Approaching, he stopped for a moment, hesitating. Maybe he was just deluding himself, seeing betrayal where there was none. But then, he heard a second voice, Jonathan's. Lucas felt his heart race. He knew he shouldn't be there, peering around like an insecure teenager, but something was pushing him forward. With slow steps, he approached the half-open door and peeked out. There they were, Emily and Jonathan, too close to each other, whispering words that Lucas couldn't clearly make out. But it was enough. The subtle touches, the hands that touched each other in a way that was far from professional. Emily laughed softly, like he hadn't seen her laugh in a long time, and that was like a stab to Lucas. He stepped back, trying to process what he had just seen. The blood pounded in his ears, and he felt a mixture of anger and sadness that threatened to overwhelm him. For a moment he considered walking into that room, confronting them right there, but decided he needed to be smart. I didn't want to lose control. He returned to the room, breathing deeply, trying to find a way to disguise the whirlwind of emotions that were plaguing him. Upon arriving at the main hall, he saw a group of colleagues and forced himself to join them, as if nothing had happened. But every laugh, every word exchanged around him seemed distant, muffled. He waited, not sure what, until he saw Emily return to the room, adjusting her dress and trying to look like the same person she always did. But, for Lucas, she was no longer the same. He had seen enough to understand what was happening, to accept that the woman he loved, the woman he had shared so many years with, was involved in something he could never forgive. The party was already coming to an end when he realized he could no longer postpone the confrontation. He walked to the center of the room, picked up a glass of champagne and asked for the microphone. There was a momentary silence as people turned to look at him, some surprised, others curious. He waited a few seconds before speaking, his voice firm but carrying a weight that no one there seemed to understand. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, he began, a smile that seemed out of place on his face. And especially to my wife, for everything she did to make this party possible. She really dedicated herself to making everything perfect. He paused, letting his words float in the air for a moment. But unfortunately, not everything is as perfect as it seems. Emily, who was next to Jonathan, looked at him, confused and uneasy. Lucas, what are you doing? She whispered, but he ignored it. I'm here to tell you I'm getting a divorce, he declared, and a shocking murmur went through the room. And the reason is simple, my wife is having an affair with her boss. The statement fell like a bomb, exploding the facade of normality that everyone was trying to maintain. The room fell into an awkward silence, and Lucas watched as everyone tried to process what they had just heard. He saw Emily's wide eyes, Jonathan's pale face, and in that moment, everything seemed to crystallize. He dropped the microphone, letting his words echo around the room, and walked away, knowing that whatever came after that moment would only be the beginning of something much bigger. The hall was plunged into a charged and uneasy silence after Lucas' statement. For a few seconds, it seemed like time had frozen. Every gaze was focused on him, Emily, and Jonathan, as if waiting for some reaction that would help them understand what they had just witnessed. Emily looked stunned, her face drained of color, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Jonathan, on the other hand, maintained a rigid expression, his eyes fixed on the ground, without the courage to look up. The air was thick, and what had once been a festive atmosphere now felt suffocating. Lucas dropped the microphone and walked away, feeling the weight of the decision he had just made. He had waited weeks for this moment, planned exactly what he would say, but now that the words were said, he felt a mixture of relief and a searing pain that seemed to spread through his chest. He looked at Emily one last time before turning on his heel and leaving the room. He knew he had left everyone in shock, but he didn't care. It was as if all the energy he had to maintain that facade of control had been exhausted. Emily, still in disbelief, tried to react. "That's a lie," she shouted, her voice echoing throughout the room. But no one seemed convinced. The murmur of curiosity and speculation among the guests had begun to spread like a wave. "Luke! Wait!" She ran after him, ignoring the gazes that followed her, trying to catch up to him before he disappeared through the exit doors. Jonathan stood still, unable to move, as if trapped in his own fear and shame. He knew this was the moment he had avoided for so long, and the truth had finally been exposed in a way he could no longer control. Lucas didn't stop walking until he reached the empty hallway, where the lights were dimmer and the noise of the party became just a distant murmur. Emily finally caught up to him, grabbing his arm tightly, forcing him to turn around and face her. His eyes were full of tears, but there was something else there, a desperation, a repressed anger. "How could you do that?" she whispered, her voice broken. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. He looked at her for a moment, his eyes cold and expressionless. How could I? He repeated, his voice low, almost a whisper. Are you asking how I could do this? Emily, the question is how could you do this to me? With our lives. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her words sounded fragile, without conviction. Lucas gave a bitter laugh. Don't you know? Please don't insult me any more than you already have. I saw you with him, Emily. And it wasn't just once. I wanted to believe that I was wrong, that it was all a misunderstanding, but after today, I can no longer close my eyes to what is right in front of me. Emily let go of his arm and took a step back, covering her mouth with her hands. She knew he was serious, and somehow the reality of the situation was finally sinking in. What she thought she could keep secret for the longest time had been undone in a single night. Lucas saw the tears run down her face, but he didn't feel sorry. There was just a coldness, a barrier he could no longer break. I'm sorry, Lucas. I didn't want it to happen like this, she began, her voice shaking. But that's not what you think. Jonathan and she trailed off, as if she couldn't find the right justification. We were confused. It was a mistake. A mistake, he interrupted, his voice rising a little, filled with disbelief. A mistake is forgetting to pick up bread from the market. What you two did was a choice. Choices that you repeated, over and over, behind my back. Jonathan, who had finally mustered the courage to leave the room and look for them, appeared in the hallway. He stopped when he saw the two of them together, their faces tense and pale. Lucas, please, we need to talk, he said, trying to maintain his composure, but his voice trailed off. This has all gotten out of hand, and I'm so sorry. Lucas turned to him, feeling a rising anger, something he had held in for a long time. Are you sorry? He said, walking until he was right next to Jonathan, his face just inches from his. You're my boss, and at the same time, you thought you could use this position to destroy my marriage. And then you think that a simple, I'm sorry, will solve everything. Jonathan tried to say something, but he couldn't find the words. All he could think was that the situation was slipping through his fingers, and he didn't know how to reverse the damage. Emily looked at both of them, her eyes pleading, trying to mediate a situation that was already beyond her control. Please stop this. I know I made a mistake, but it can't end like this. Lucas, we need to talk, just the two of us. We can go home and sort this out in private, she begged. Lucas gave a short laugh, a dry sound that cut through the silence. In private? Now you want to resolve everything in private? After cheating on me, after doing this to someone I trusted, who I saw every day at work? He shook his head, feeling the weight of his own words. No, Emily. There is nothing left to be resolved between us. The silence that followed was heavy, full of unspoken words. Jonathan looked at Emily, waiting for her to say something that would change the situation, but she remained silent, just sobbing softly. Lucas turned, ready to leave, but something stopped him. He looked at Jonathan, his eyes cold and determined. Do you know what's most ironic about all this? He began, with a tone that mixed anger and a strange tranquility. I wasn't the only one who noticed what was happening. One of the directors also saw you together, several times, and now he is investigating all your operations at the company. He has proof, Jonathan. And very soon, everyone will know that you are not only an adulterous boss, but also a corrupt one. Jonathan froze. What are you talking about? His voice cracked, and he felt a chill run down his spine. That's not true. This cannot be true. It cannot. Lucas took a step forward, his voice lower but filled with an intensity that made Jonathan step back. I wasn't going to let this go, Jonathan. You destroyed something important to me, and now, finally, the consequences are coming for you too. Jonathan's face turned pale. Emily looked at him, confused, trying to understand what Lucas meant. "What is he talking about, Jonathan?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. "What else are you hiding?" Jonathan didn't respond. He just stood there, still, unable to process what was happening. For months, he had controlled the narrative, had manipulated situations so that everything was in his favor. But now, with Lucas exposing the betrayal and even insinuating something much more serious, he realized that he no longer had any control. "Lucas, that's not necessary. We can solve this another way, we don't need to ruin everything," Jonathan said, trying desperately to maintain a calmness that he clearly didn't feel. "Ah, but it's necessary," Lucas replied, taking a step back. "And it's already ruined, Jonathan. You ruined everything the moment you thought you could play with my life without paying the price. And now, I'll make sure you pay. Everyone will know who you really are." And then, without waiting for an answer, Lucas turned and walked down the hall, leaving Jonathan and Emily frozen, wrapped in their own lies and despair. He knew that this was just the beginning of the end for them, and that the revelations that would come next would destroy much more than a marriage. Lucas left the building, the cold night air wrapping around him like a rough hug. His body felt heavy, as if he were carrying years of accumulated hurt and frustration. For a long time, he held back, avoiding confrontation, but now that he had said everything, the pain didn't go away. On the contrary, it felt more real than ever. He had thrown everything on the table, exposed the betrayals and secrets, and yet, he felt that something was still missing. The truth, although liberating, did not have the power to immediately heal the wounds it left behind. As Lucas walked down the deserted sidewalk, away from the lights and muffled music of the party, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He knew that his decision to expose Jonathan and Emily like that had repercussions that went beyond his marriage. It was about to bring down the boss's entire public image, ruining the career of a man who until then had been seen as a successful leader. But at the same time, there was something almost tragic about how he felt himself. He was not just a betrayed man, this was someone who decided that if his life was going to fall apart, then others would fall apart too. Jonathan, on the other hand, had remained in the hallway for what seemed like an interminable amount of time after Lucas left. Emily watched him, trying to find some sign of reaction, a response that could explain everything she had just heard. She knew she had made a huge mistake, but she had no idea the extent of what was to come. "Jonathan," she murmured, her voice almost trailing off, "what did he mean about this investigation? Is that true?" Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to remain calm, but the mask of confidence he usually wore was starting to crumble. He looked at Emily, and for the first time that night, there was clear panic in his eyes. "Yes, it's true," he admitted, his voice cracking. "They're looking into some internal operations. Adjustments I made to keep the numbers up." He avoided looking directly at her, as if the shame were too heavy. "I thought I could control it, I thought no one would notice." Emily stared at him, shocked. Until that moment, she thought that the worst had already been exposed, that their betrayal was what would bring the most serious consequences. But now, there was something darker and deeper, something she hadn't anticipated. "Jonathan, this could destroy everything," she said, the urgency in her voice growing. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe it was just the two of us?" He shook his head, struggling to find the words. "I thought I could solve it, fix everything before it became a problem. But Lucas, he knew. And he used it against me. He wanted to make sure that if I destroyed his life, he would destroy mine." There was a heavy dilemma hanging in the air. Emily felt torn between guilt over what she had done and panic over what could still happen. She had chosen Jonathan for reasons she herself could barely explain. Maybe it was the adrenaline of the forbidden, the desire to escape a routine that suffocated her, or simply his charisma, which seemed so different from Lucas's calm constancy. But now, faced with the consequences, she realized that that choice could drag everyone down. "What are we going to do?" she asked, and for the first time, her voice sounded helpless, as if she were addressing a stranger. Jonathan didn't have an answer. He had spent years building his career, manipulating situations to his advantage, and now everything was falling apart. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice sounding more fragile than he would have liked. "But I'm not going to let this destroy me. I'm not going to let Lucas win." Meanwhile, outside, Lucas had stopped at a nearby bench, letting himself sink into the seat as he stared into space. He knew he had thrown everything away, that the consequences of his actions could be devastating. But in a way, he also felt a strange calm, as if he had finally made something of himself after so long sacrificing himself for others. His phone vibrated in his pocket, and he almost ignored it until he saw the name of one of the company's directors flashing on the screen. "Lucas," said the voice on the other end, tensely, "I heard what happened at the party. Did you really expose everything, even though you know the impact it could have?" Lucas hesitated for a moment before responding. "I knew it. But they forced me into it. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. And if Jonathan is involved in something that's going to hurt the company, then it better come to light now. You know this isn't simple, right?" the director continued, his voice getting quieter, almost as if he was checking to make sure no one was listening. "If his operations are investigated and there is evidence of corruption, the entire company could be affected. It won't just be Jonathan. It will be everyone." Lucas closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the words. He knew he was playing a dangerous game, but he couldn't back down now. "And what do you suggest? That I remain silent and let him continue as if nothing had happened?" "I suggest you think carefully about the consequences," said the director. "Because sometimes, taking someone down can mean taking down everything around them as well. And you could end up destroying more than just the man who betrayed you." Lucas didn't respond right away. He knew there was a point to it, but the thought of Jonathan getting away with it was unbearable. For weeks, he had suffered in silence while the two of them led double lives, hiding behind the facade of false normality. And now, faced with the possibility that his revenge could ruin everything, he felt trapped in an impossible dilemma. Was it a question of justice or destruction? The moral dilemma grew thicker and thicker, and Lucas realized that, deep down, the choice wasn't as clear as he would have liked. He wanted justice, but how willing was he to sacrifice everything to achieve it? Would he become the villain by trying to expose one? When he hung up the phone, the silence around him felt heavier. The party was already dispersing, and he saw some people leaving, still whispering and looking back as if they expected something else to happen. Emily and Jonathan were still inside, probably trying to patch up the pieces of a situation that was only going to get worse. Lucas knew his next move was up to him, but the question was, how far was he willing to go to settle the score? The day after the party dawned with a tense silence, as if the air itself was charged with something about to explode. Lucas didn't come home that night. Instead, he spent the early morning hours walking the empty streets, trying to calm the mind that refused to stop spinning. The words and looks from the night before continued to echo, and he knew that what he had done had set something in motion that no one could stop. As the sun began to rise, he made the decision that would define the end of this story. Hours later, the company was buzzing. There were rumors running through the halls, and news about Jonathan's exposure at the party had spread quickly. The employees were torn between curiosity and discomfort, and it seemed like everyone was waiting for something more to be revealed. Jonathan arrived at the office earlier than usual, his face tired and worried. He knew he needed to act quickly to save what was left of his reputation, but he felt control slipping through his fingers. It was then that he received the call he had been dreading. The board had decided to launch an official investigation into its operations. Someone, and he knew very well who, had provided enough information for the company to justify an audit. "You can't do this to me," he said, his voice strained, during a meeting with one of the directors. "Everything I did was for the good of the company. You know that." But the director just looked at him with calculated coldness. "Perhaps you should have thought of that before mixing your ambitions with lies, Jonathan. It's too late now." Meanwhile, Lucas was with his lawyer, finalizing the divorce papers. He knew this was the only way to free himself from all the pain that had been caused. Emily had tried to contact him several times, begging for a chance to explain, but he could no longer hear anything she had to say. Every word, every apology, felt empty, as if nothing could fill the void she had created. The betrayal was the tip of the iceberg, but the truth is that he had lost the woman he knew long before he discovered the affair. Lucas, she had left a message, her voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I know I made a mistake, but we can work it out. Please call me." But he didn't respond. He had reached his limit, and nothing she said could change what was already destroyed. The divorce paperwork was just confirmation of something that had already broken long before. Jonathan, in turn, saw his life begin to quickly fall apart. With the internal investigation, secrets he had kept well hidden began to surface. These were not just small irregularities, they were frauds that, if revealed to the public, could bring the company to the brink of scandal. And he knew that it had been Lucas who had provided the most compromising details. For years, Jonathan had manipulated situations to stay on top, but now, every bad decision he made was coming back to haunt him. He tried to get ahead of it, contacting allies, proposing agreements, but the evidence was accumulating too quickly for him to control it. It was then that he made a desperate decision. Knowing that scandal was imminent, Jonathan called a press conference. He intended to take responsibility for some administrative failures and try to keep the narrative under his control. But while he was speaking, with a false confidence that no longer convinced anyone, the Internal Investigation Department released an official statement to the media, revealing all the fraud and irregularities. It was a complete exposure, with no chance of recovery. Jonathan's career was ruined, and he knew he would lose much more than just his position. Financial and legal ruin was inevitable. Emily was also affected by all of this. She found herself suddenly isolated. The friends and acquaintances who once surrounded her began to avoid her, as if her closeness to Jonathan and the scandal were contagious. And no matter how much she tried to explain herself, no one wanted to listen. To them, she was just part of a public drama that everyone wanted to forget. She lost her job, her social position, and the prospects of rebuilding her life seemed increasingly distant. Her decision to cheat on Lucas not only destroyed her marriage, but also the image she had cultivated for so many years. In the end, she was left alone, with nothing but the consequences of her choices. Lucas, on the other hand, found a new way to move forward. The pain of betrayal was still there, but he began to realize that life outside of that marriage didn't mean the end of everything. After difficult weeks, he decided to leave the city, accepting an offer to lead a team in a new company, far from everything that had become toxic. He knew that carrying around the bitterness would only keep him stuck in the past, and for the first time in months, he felt like he was ready for something new, something that wasn't defined by the betrayals and lies he had left behind. In the end, the shock of the revelations brought drastic consequences for everyone. Jonathan was fired and sued, not only by the company, but also by investors who felt deceived by his fraudulent actions. He lost everything, and the man who once seemed invincible now faced an uncertain and bleak future. Emily, who believed she had found a new passion, found herself separated and abandoned, realizing too late that her choices came at too high a price. And Lucas, although marked by everything that happened, found a way to free himself, to move forward and rebuild his life without the lies that previously surrounded him. Betrayal destroyed what they had, and lies ruined everything around. In the end, each person's choices shaped their own destiny, and the truth, although painful, brought everyone an inevitable outcome. Lucas moved on to an uncertain future, but now, with a lightness that he hadn't felt in a long time, leaving behind a past of betrayals that no longer had power over him. If you liked this story, leave your opinion and what you thought of each character's outcome in the comments. We want to know how you reacted to these shocking revelations. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Each narrative is a way of showing how these acts can destroy lives and relationships of trust. Until next time, and thanks for following along.